proven as well that it increases the self-efficacy of those students. It increases persistence and success, which means these students graduate who have been within these peer mentoring programs. And so there's been a lot of research on that, but again, at those larger universities. So the peer mentoring research that I completed, which I will discuss today, was done at a local community college, about 30,000 students total. And the cool thing about this was about 30% of that population at that community college, the students were enrolled in distance learning courses. And so the goal was to see if the implementation of a peer mentoring strategy and really an intervention increased success rates in an introductory STEM distance learning course and completion rates. And looking at underrepresented students, it focused on race or by race. So looking if peer mentoring had an effect on those students who were in different ethnicity or racial groups, genders, if they were first generation or a continuing student, okay, or had low SES, and looking at age. So looking at those things that would categorize these students as being underrepresented. Additionally, looking at the self-efficacy, the confidence of these students, particularly in STEM. Okay, so majority of the students that participated did fall in at least one of the underrepresented categories. And so looking if their confidence, okay, their self-efficacy in STEM was increased after participation in peer mentoring. And then getting the opinions of these students. What were their perceptions of peer mentoring? Okay, those that participated. So again, the population, local community college, about 30,000 students. And so if we look here, wide, very diverse community college, and majority of the students, of course, are female. And I shouldn't say of course, but that's kind of been around the board in research that, females are enrolling in college at a greater rate. Okay. But if we look at STEM and we think about women in STEM, still considered an underrepresented group, okay, in STEM. And so, again, 30% of these students at this college were enrolled in at least one distance learning course. And so in this research, participants who participated, so let me take a step back. In doing my research, I invited instructors of STEM. And so starting out with science and math, because those are like the heavy hitters in STEM and specifically at community colleges, invited instructors who taught all distance learning courses, particularly looking at instructors that had at least two distance learning courses of the same subject. And it was looking at introductory level courses, because those courses, again, they're the gatekeepers, the gateway. And so a lot of students will enroll. Not many students are successful in those courses. And so in 2 semesters, and they were consecutive semesters, so the fall and the summer of 2022, so last year, right, recently graduated, students who were enrolled in 8 sections of introductory STEM courses were solicited to complete a survey. The survey focused on students' self-efficacy in STEM. Okay, so looking at how they felt they could complete STEM tasks, specifically science tasks, initially. So what their self-efficacy was initially once they entered into the class, right? And then if they volunteered to participate in peer mentoring, what their self-efficacy, their perceived self-efficacy was after. And so again, we think about limitations and stuff. We just hope that the students are honest once they're answering these survey questions. And so going off of that, use this research to kind of see if there was an influence, or if peer mentoring influenced these students' confidence in STEM, in addition to their success within the course. And so before I get into talking about how the intervention of peer mentoring was implemented, like I said earlier, we don't always have to reinvent the wheel. So being that we use learning management systems at most colleges and universities, I wanted to pose the question, are you all familiar with the collaborative tools that your learning management system, whether it be Blackboard, Canvas, D2L, I know there's probably other ones that I'm missing. Those are just the ones I'm familiar with. Are you familiar with those collaborative tools that are already accessible to you and your students? And so if you could just go back to Menti, okay, and type that code again and just answer the poll and tell me if you're very familiar, somewhat familiar, or you've never used them before. Awesome. All right. So we got a couple who are very familiar. Got one that's somewhat familiar. Doesn't look like, looks as though everybody's at least used them, right? Those of you who responded, if you could just kind of tell me in what capacity have you used these collaborative tools? Was it something that was mandatory that you had to at least have like a discussion board? Or did you do like a project or something using these collaborative tools? And if you guys are writing in the chat, I don't see it. Let me see. Okay, here we go. I just had it hidden. Okay, someone said COVID made us learn to use it. Absolutely. Okay, I think a couple more people are typing. Yeah, COVID kind of made us learn to do a lot of different things. So I'm going to give those individuals a couple minutes to kind of type it out. Groups for study groups, discussion boards, very, very good. So sometimes we do things such as like peer mentoring and we don't even realize it, right? Blackboard virtual meeting room for weekly review sessions, perfect discussion boards. Kind of like in my class, I have like a burning questions discussion board. And so it's anonymous, right? But they can just kind of write, hey, I don't understand this. Can you go over this? And it helps me, but also, you know, understand what the students know or don't know, right? But then also there may be students who had that question but were too afraid to ask. So I really, really like those anonymous discussion boards. Projects, absolutely. So you guys are pretty much doing the peer mentoring, right? It's like we just have to add the term to it, right? To make it official, okay? Like I said, in education, we like those buzzwords. All right, so I use the collaborative tools, okay, that were in the college's LMS system. They had tools that allowed the students to collaborate through discussion boards. Students could do journals. They could share information. So these tools were already accessible, didn't have to come up with anything else. Now, in meeting with the instructors, if they had other tools where students could collaborate and communicate, it was very much welcomed, right? So if they wanted to use things like Remind, use things like GroupMe, Flipgrid, any of those things were, you know, for them to use. But of course, I asked the instructors if they could, you know, of course, let me know what they were using and how these students, you know, were working with, and how did they keep tabs that the students were actually meeting and mentoring each other. Okay, so here is the population. The participants started out with 4 classes, so 4 full distance learning courses, and again, those introductory courses. But as we know, as time goes on, students, you know, may have to drop or withdraw from the class. So these 4 sessions or 4 classes originally started with 30 students each. So approximately 60 students were being compared. Okay, and so the way that the intervention was set up is once these instructors of these distance learning courses agreed to participate, preferably looking for instructors that had 2 of the same course, so there could be a comparison. Because generally, if you have 2 of the same course, these instructors are teaching the same way, right? They outline their courses pretty much the same. To be honest, most of us kind of just copy the course into the next, right? And so unfortunately, because still getting back into the hang of offering online courses, there was 3 instructors. So there was only one instructor that had 2 of the same course, and the other courses were taught by 3 different instructors. they were essentially the same course. And in interviewing the instructors, they had similar teaching strategies. And so they were very similar in how they did a couple of their things, okay? Things that they implemented in their class and grading and so forth. So try to kind of keep it equal, even though the instructors were different, okay? So again, the purpose of this was to see the influence of peer mentoring. Number one was engagement, okay? Again, research has proved that having engagement in a course definitely increases completion rates and success rates. Making sure that these students are interacting, right? There's some kind of interactivity within this online course because they're learning at different times because, you know, the course is accessible to them pretty much anytime at their convenience, okay? That's one of the key reasons they enroll in these courses. And so what the students and the instructors did, they completed the survey at the start of the semester. So beginning at week 2, there was, of course, a couple hiccups. So some of these, the implementation was kind of set back a little bit into week 4 after the first exam, which ended up being a benefit, okay? Because students were seeing, oh, well, if I studied on my own or I worked by myself, maybe this will kind of help if I didn't get that initial score on that first exam, you know, that I wanted, okay? And so it was, you know, it was a little hectic for me being the researcher, like, oh no, you know, time crunch. But it really worked out, I think, for the students and the instructors in the end. And so once students completed the survey, their composite score of that survey was used to determine if they had or considered themselves or perceived themselves as having high self-efficacy or low self-efficacy. And so once we got that average, or once I got the average, it was about a 3.6 was like that midline, that baseline to determine if they had above a 3.6, it was considered high. If they perceived themselves below a 3.6, it was considered low. And so forming these variation of dyads, so it was, of course, 2 students who were going to be peer mentoring each other, again, in the same course. And so just kind of mixed the students, a heterogeneous mixture. Those who had high self-efficacy were grouped with another student that considered themselves as having a high self-efficacy. Those who perceived themselves as low were matched with someone else who was low, and then those that were high and low were matched, okay? And so in doing that, research has shown that a lot of different things will come from that, right? Those who are high will compete with each other, so they will motivate and kind of push each other to do better. And those that are high-low will kind of take on that nurturing feel and, you know, be there as support and kind of guide the student, even though they're in the same class, right? That kind of takes a jump back into what we would consider traditional peer mentoring, with that nurturing and having that student who's a little bit more experienced. But these students, again, are in the same class, but, you know, are at different levels in a sense. And then those that are low would kind of just really work with each other, okay? And so research has kind of shown, and that research in the groupings and the pairings of students is all the way starting in like kindergarten. So it's, you know, elementary all the way through post-secondary education, looking at the benefits, okay? And there are some disadvantages to it as well, because, you know, students that are low may just not motivate each other and just be like, oh, I don't know, they don't know, you know, we'll just see where it goes, right? And so you could get those things as well. And so students had specific tasks and objectives once the dyads were formed. And so they were encouraged to, of course, respond to the posts. So instructors of these courses came up with discussion board posts that were motivational, okay? So having reflection time with each other, but also discussions that were course content related, okay? So that were related, maybe once they completed a chapter before the exam, they had a question over a specific topic. And so again, in collaboration with those instructors, came up with these particular prompts that students would answer and work together to get the answer. At the end, or near the end, these students will work in dyads in their peer mentoring dyads to complete a college mandated project. And so in most cases, for the science courses, it is a case study. And so they work to kind of solve this case study or determine what's happening, or give their take on this particular case study. And so initially it is done alone. And so students would collaborate with this. And all of this was approved, right? I always have to put that disclaimer out. It was approved, of course, filling out the IRB and stuff, to make the changes within these courses. And so once students did that throughout the semester, at the end of the peer mentoring dyads, they would then complete a post survey, which essentially is the same self-efficacy survey, just to see their perceived self-efficacy after they have participated in peer mentoring, okay, and interacted with other students. And then looking at those success and completion rates based on final grades. Success was measured if they received an A through C within the course, and then completion was if they just persisted and completed the course. And so the findings, so looking at the quantitative findings, peer mentoring had a great effect. It was definitely a positive outcome on the students based on race. So looking at race, peer mentoring influenced race in success and completion rates, okay? Peer mentoring had a great effect. And so really, and I'm trying not to get too passionate about it, even though I was very passionate about this, I still am, on these first generation students, okay? It definitely influenced the success of first generation students, okay? Completing the course successfully, so making an A, a B, or a C. And then in comparing the races to see if there was like a difference amongst the racial and ethnicity groups based on peer mentoring. And so if we take a look at the plots here, we can see that looking at Hispanic groups, Black groups, and white groups, there was definitely a difference if we're looking at the means, okay, of the success rates. So again, those students making at least a 70, okay? And so we can see that there was an increase there, and it definitely had an influence on their success. Asian students, not so much. There were a few Asian students in comparison to the other groups, but the peer mentoring didn't have as a big of effect as compared to the students who didn't participate in peer mentoring. And so relating back to research, this is pretty standard, okay? If we look at, the racial and ethnic groups, and we compare Asian students and white students in comparison to Black and Hispanic students, they tend to be more successful, okay? And so there's tons of research out there about reasons why, but I had a question, was this shocking to me? And it wasn't, because of the research. Research has shown that these students tend to do better in, science courses, STEM courses, in comparison to minority groups. And again, looking at completion, same thing. We saw, a greater mean or average of those students in the various racial and ethnicity groups, Black, white, and Hispanic, who participated in peer mentoring compared to those that didn't. If we look at first generation, we can see that there was a significant difference there, okay, in the success of these first generation students in comparison to the continuing generation students. This was a key finding, okay, because going back to one of your statements, you said these students that are freshmen, they're first generation, no one in their family, and not all first generation students may, be freshmen, but they don't have that experience, okay, or got that, background knowledge from someone who's been in college before. And so this was very, very important, being that first generation research is still, of course, emerging as well, and it's continuing to grow also. And then peer mentoring and gender. So this, even though we saw a difference there, the results kind of, or the volunteers kind of skewed towards female. There were more females that participated than males in the peer mentoring intervention. Any questions so far? I'm trying to make sure I finish everything. Okay, I'll leave room for questions at the end as well. All right. And so looking at the self-efficacy, the confidence of the students, looking at the differences, comparing their perceived self-efficacy initially versus their final, okay, once they participated in peer mentoring. And there was a significant increase in student self-confidence, their self-efficacy after uh, participating in peer mentoring for the semester. And so again, fall semester was 16 weeks, and then that summer semester was it was a short summer session. So that ties into like the pace of a course. It was 5 weeks, and so combining all of that together, there was an increase in this confidence of students. And so I'll give a little bit more insight on that once we get the qualitative information. And so just to kind of back up that quantitative data, interviewing some participants, students volunteered to interview, had about 22 students who were willing to give their perception. And so looking at that, these participants said that the peer mentoring helped with their accountability. It provided support. It increased their interactions with their peers, but also with their instructors and also with the content. Okay, so that was again eye-opening. There's research on engagement, right, and being interactive that shows, once you have that engagement in the course, then it kind of increases things across the board, right? Interactions with students, instructors, and definitely the content, which is all very important in success for these students, okay? And then students definitely said that it increased their self-efficacy within STEM, within these science courses. And so peer mentoring overall was definitely beneficial in the eyes of these students who volunteered. And so here are just some quotes that the students told me these interview participants stated. And so a lot of them talked about the accountability. A lot of the students were like, this was my second time taking the course. And the first time I didn't do so well. I need this course to get into my program that I want to go into. I need this course for my career. And this intervention really helped me to be accountable for myself while I'm balancing everything else, but also have that accountability for my peer, right? And that support from my peer. And so just kind of in looking here, it says it allows you to be accountable. So when you feel that you have to be accountable for someone else, it's like, oh no, I got to do this, right? I can't forget, because I don't want them to take a bad grade or a bad score because, of me. All right. So it pushed it motivated those students to kind of stay on top of their work, but also keep their peer on top of their work as well. Students mentioned that their engagement was increased, their interactions with their peers and their instructor and the content was increased. A lot of these students, this was not their first distance learning course. They had been in other distance learning courses previously. And, I was shocked. A lot of the students were like, tell other professors about this. We need this in other, distance learning courses, because a lot of the students were enrolled in the distance learning program. They took all distance learning courses because they had to work, they had a family, to take care of. And then in the end, these students said that their confidence was increased, right? They didn't do so well on their first exam. They didn't do so well on that first assignment. But once they got in this group, they learned how to study, right? They learned these different things from their peers that helped them to be successful, probably things they've never heard of. There were a lot of students that weren't from this country, right? So maybe it was their first real science course, first real STEM course. There were students that were coming back after several years of being out of school. And they, just kind of talked about this was a benefit of just having someone. And one thing that I remember that one interview participant said, she said, this is life. We don't really do anything by ourselves. So having, this ability to work with someone teaches us skills that are going to be beneficial forever, in everything that we do. And so that stuck with me because I'm like, you know what? That's very true. And it was so eye-opening for me, but also for the student, to just kind of realize this is going to happen regardless if I'm face-to-face or if I'm online, right? In whatever that I do. And so just quickly about the discussion, I want to leave time for questions. The participants, again, those interactions were increased, their confidence were increased. Students felt they were more successful because they had someone that was holding them accountable and providing that support. The peer dyad, students not only worked with their assigned peer, they began to form larger groups, okay? And they begin to find ways to meet in person, Starbucks, face-to-face. So they kind of took this, elsewhere as well. And so that was the true benefit of this particular intervention, okay? Using that peer mentoring at this course level. And so the findings that were found were consistent with a lot of studies that have been done previously, a lot of new studies, more current studies. As I said, peer mentoring is not anything new, but it's definitely emerging in this particular modality, in this setting. And so that embedded peer support, there's a lot of research coming out about embedding peer support in the class, having someone who's there, whether it be an experienced student who's coming in to kind of tutor, which we call peer tutoring, or we have, what do we call it? The supplemental instructor, so SI, again, a student who has experience and more knowledge versus these students. And so taking on that same idea, but of course we have all these different terms for it. There were some limitations, of course. This was done in one area of STEM, so science. So definitely feel that it needs to be done across the board, and not only in STEM, in other levels, right? Or in other areas, other subjects, but at that course level, rather than it being such a large scale. And I think someone in the chat mentioned we scaffold this for the students, okay? And you can definitely start it, and increase to that larger component, okay? And then of course, instructors, right, of these distance learning courses, learning how to use those tools that we already have and implementing these things to help their students be successful. And so hopefully this research continues. I hope to continue the research that I've done and share it across the board so that other individuals will want to take on this research, specifically at community colleges, because community colleges have a key place. They are at that forefront of increasing our educational needs within the world, for sure. Any questions or comments? And I thank you for joining me today. I hope that you definitely learned something and will take this and kind of run with it. And, if you would like my contact information, I will definitely supply that. I'll supply my email in the chat. If you have any questions or want to collaborate, I'm definitely here to do that. Okay, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gradney. That was such an excellent presentation.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Were there any questions? Oh, I think I see a message. Sorry, guys. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.
I don't see any messages, any questions in the chat. I guess I have one question for you.
Yeah.
So you're facing a new group of students and you're going to sell this idea to them. How do you present it to them on that first day?
So I always start my class with this quote. I went to a conference and it was with Dr. Ellington. I think she's at Michigan State, I want to say, if I can recall. And she said, really, in order to understand and to be successful, you have to first, research it first, and then you have to participate. And so I always tell students that, and I'm like, how many of you honestly learn by yourself? You can really, really say that you know how to study for this particular course. And that's, of course, a general bio or an A&P course. And how many of you really feel, that you can do this by yourself on your own? And you get those students that do. And you get the students who say, I don't want to work with anyone else. I'm okay, working by myself. And so I just kind of tell them to get them to buy in. You need people. We all need someone, right? We all need someone to kind of help us, whether it's consistently, whether it's, hey, I drop in, I need you, you need me. So try it out. And I ask them, try it out. If you don't like it, you don't have to stay in it. And, there's no risk, you're not going to be penalized if you don't want to stay
Okay.
in it. And then we'll just, if, your peer wants to continue, we'll just match them with someone else. So I've had semesters where I've done this, and other instructors have continued to do it as well, where we have students, it's no longer a dyad. We have students of 3 because someone who was a partner didn't want to continue to do it, or they didn't have time, right? Because we're all kind of running on time. And so we kind of match those students with someone else.
I love that you make it optional. I think that would probably increase buy-in alone because they can see the proof. And if it's useful for them, they're going to want to keep doing it. So
Yes.
I teach developmental English, and that peer mentoring becomes incredibly important for those students. And at that point, it often is related to just attendance, showing up, participating. Those are the sorts of things that they help each other with because they feel that accountability. And the last semester I taught that, it just seemed to really grow exponentially in that class. And I see them walking around the hall still together and taking classes together because they formed these groups that became really important. Well, thank you so much for your presentation. I certainly enjoyed it. I think a lot of other people did as well. I do think we have someone typing in the chat, Dr. Nazarenko. Great discussion, and thank you. Yes, absolutely. I agree. So have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your conference.
Yes, awesome. You guys do as well. Thank y'all so much. Bye.